For the first time in the history of international criminal justice systems, the Rome Statute, the founding document of the International Criminal Court, which has been signed and ratified by over 120 states, is putting victims at the center of its proceedings. Victims have the right to participate and request for reparations. But what does it mean and how does it work in practice? In the courtroom, victims are represented by lawyers who ensure that their views and concerns are heard by the judges. But the process of victims' participation starts on the ground, in the situation-related countries, in the affected communities, in the towns and villages where the victims reside.
Alors je vais parler en français et Gervais pourra traduire en sango après. Donc je travaille pour la section de la participation des victimes et des réparations. Notre travail, c'est d'aider les victimes à pouvoir demander, à participer et demander des réparations. Alors je vais expliquer ce que ça veut dire.
The proceedings that we have before us, we're looking at war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. So to be a victim, to qualify as a victim before the court, you need to be someone who has suffered harm from one of the crimes that have been charged by the prosecutor.
Pour être reconnu comme une victime dans le procès contre Jean-Pierre Bemba, spécifiquement dans ce procès, il faut être une victime des crimes qui sont reprochés à M. Bemba. Que les crimes dans cette affaire, ce sont le meurtre, le pillage et le viol. Donc ça veut dire que les victimes qui vont être reconnues par les juges, ce sont les victimes qui ont souffert à cause de ces trois crimes-là. Le meurtre, le pillage.
Now, the traditional way for a victim to participate in the proceedings is by submitting a written application form to my office, the VPRS.
Si les victimes veulent être reconnues par les juges comme victimes, il faut qu'elles fassent une demande. Il faut qu'elles remplissent ce formulaire dont on a parlé tout à l'heure.
As you could see, the participation process starts with a direct contact with the victims. Once the victims decide to apply to participate in the proceedings, the application forms are sent from the field offices to the court in The Hague.
Alors, ici, ce sont les enveloppes que j'ai préparées avec les formulaires qui ont été reçus ces derniers temps. Et nous remplissons des papiers pour bien garder la trace entre ici au bureau sur le terrain et nos collègues à La Haye pour être sûrs que tous les formulaires sont bien conservés de manière confidentielle.
Once applications are received from the field office, someone from my office will review the applications and determine whether or not the victims are within the scope of the case. If so, we do a sort of legal breakdown and submit the applications to the judges, and the judges will make the final determination as to whether or not these victims are entitled to participate in the proceedings.
All rise, if you feel okay.
Well, merci.
Thank you, says the witness.
2652, yeah. And it's a victim of rape, sexual violence. Mm-hmm. It appears that the description of the crime is coherent. Mm-hmm. It took place in Bosangwa, and the temporary scope of the events. There is, in the annex, we have the documents proving the identity. It's consistent and it's reliable, so I would grant this application. Okay. Mm-hmm. So Estelle, please take note that application 2652 is granted.
There's a court-wide push to really make these processes not only more efficient, but more meaningful for victims. And the idea is that if we have a situation where we're dealing with mass crimes, which is almost all of the situations that the ICC finds itself in, we need to have a system that can cater to large numbers of victims. There have been some processes that have been used and implemented in different situation countries, experimenting with collective participation and field registration. And the VPRS seeks to be at the forefront of these processes and developing something that will be meaningful for large numbers of victims going forward.
Les victimes sont des acteurs indépendants des procédures qui se déroulent devant cette Cour. Leurs préoccupations diffèrent de celles de l'accusation, n'en déplaise à la défense. Leur position est celle de pouvoir contribuer à la recherche et à l'établissement de la vérité. Ce processus passe par la prise de parole, le partage des faits vécus, la reconnaissance des préjudices qu'elles ont subis et des crimes qui en sont à l'origine.
Legal representatives are there in order to make sure that victims have an opportunity to explain to the judges and to explain to the other parties and participants what happened to them in the way in which victims wish to explain what happened to them.
One of the main challenges facing the court is locating the victims of the crimes to inform them of their right to participate in the processes. This is true, especially so given the fact that the court has limited resources. The court relies on its own outreach capabilities in cooperation with civil society groups, intermediaries, and the media.
So, but where precisely did you find these individuals? I mean, we know where the violence took place, obviously, but when you have a crime like forced displacement, they're not normally in the same places where the crimes took place. So where were you finding these individuals, and what were they saying in the particular location?
Well, they get spread around quite a lot. You have them moving as far east as burnt forests. You have some of them still living around Kiamba area, and some of these areas are pretty wide. Some of them in Yamumbi. And what happens is, in each of those locations, because of the displacement, they are quite eager. They feel quite aggrieved about what happened, and victims' participation is not clear to them. They do not understand that victims are not per se witnesses. They're not going there to give evidence information. All they see is this is a community of people who come from a different tribal group, and they'll be interacting with people from the court. So as far as they're concerned, they are still very tense. I would say the victims are still concerned that if they are perceived to be assisting the court process in some way, then they will be subjected to further violations.
I will just share with you briefly the places that I intend to visit, and probably if there's any particular place you have in mind, you intend to engage victims, I would be more than happy to adjust my plan to be able to fit into the objective of what you have discussed.
No, that's fantastic, and also perhaps we can go over some of the key messages that we need to address. VPRS can kind of tweak them to make sure that they are victim-centered, and then maybe those are the kind of messages that you could relate to these communities.
And those messages probably will also help us in the media campaign that we want to launch to address victim-specific issues as well as the general misperceptions about the courts.
Locating victims wherever they may reside within the given country, the situation country. Our central challenge is really to ensure the security of those that are engaging with the court. We don't have a standing army or police force that we can rely upon to ensure this security. So what we do rely on is our best practices that we've developed over the years to ensure the confidentiality and the security of those seeking to participate. We do this mainly by training intermediaries on these best practices, so that when victims choose to come forward and engage in this participation process, they do so knowing that they've undertaken a certain amount of risk, but also how to mitigate that risk.
Sasa nimekuja na kituo cha sheria kuuliza ushauri. Sasa kama mimi mwathiriwa, nitakaa namna gani juu nimegombea maisha yangu?
Kwanza kabisa Bwana Simon, kulingana na mambo ya security, inafaa uelewe kwamba security yako inaanza na wewe. Kabla hata tuende kwa ile jukumu la serikali ama la ICC, usalama inaanza na wewe. Ukienda kule kwa mtaani alafu nielezea watu kwamba wewe sasa uko kwa ICC, utakuwa unatarisha maisha yako. Kwanza kabisa inafaa uelewe kwamba polisi wako na jukumu la kukuchunga. Kwa hivyo kama kuna mtu yule anakutishia, jambo la kwanza ni kwenda kuna kuripoti kwa polisi. Na pia unaweza kuja kutueleza ili tuweze kuona jinsi ambavyo tunaweza kuongea na polisi au hata chifu wa area yako ili weze kuhakikisha kwamba usalama yako inalindwa.
Il serait erroné de dire que les victimes n'ont aucune attente. Elles n'en ont toutefois que de légitimes, à l'instar de celles que tout individu a à l'égard d'une cour de justice. Elles attendent une justice attentive, indépendante, impartiale, transparente et effective.
Cette question, c'est de savoir, il y a des gens qui sont passés les enregistrer parce qu'on les a tous pillés. Mais jusqu'à quand est-ce qu'on va leur restituer ce qu'ils ont perdu ou réparer tout ce qu'ils ont perdu?
The victims do have very many expectations from the ICC process. And it has been quite a challenge, I'll be honest with you, in trying to manage those expectations. First, we have the expectation that if I am a victim and I had a business that was doing well, I want my business back and I want the court to pay me the damages I suffered during the post-election violence. That's one of the expectations they have, especially monetary expectations. Yes, they're kind of high.
The International Criminal Court is the first international criminal court that has the mandate to order a convicted person to pay reparations to victims. If the convicted person does not have the means to do so, the judges may request the Trust Fund for Victims to assist in implementing its orders of reparations. The Trust Fund for Victims was created by the state parties to the Rome Statute to implement reparations and to provide support to victims of the crimes within the jurisdiction of the court. It is funded through voluntary contributions by states and donations, and through fines and forfeitures.
The trust fund may be asked by the court to implement reparations as ordered by the court against a convicted person in a particular case. We still have to see how the first reparations order will finally be shaped by the court, but then it may be the task of the trust fund to make sure that these reparations become meaningful to the victims in that case, and they actually contribute to the redress of their harm and to transform their situation into a better picture for the future. At this moment, the Trust Fund is working in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo and in Uganda, and we are planning to start activities soon in the Central African Republic, hopefully when the situation is improved. The type of programs that we implement together with our local partners consists of both collective and individual activities. Collective activities may include activities like the Caravane de la Paix, in which communities amongst themselves try to find solutions for the root causes of the conflict in a way which is non-violent. Individual examples of support is reconstructive surgery for victims who have been mutilated, and also physical rehabilitation and psychosocial counseling. And this is an activity which we have implemented, for instance, in Uganda for the past 5 years already. In total, we're reaching out to more than 85,000 victims at this moment.
طلبي الوحيد يعني دايرة الاستعجال في القضية لا يستغرق القضية أكثر من شهرين أو 3 شهور. احنا دايرين نرجع الرد لأنه مر البشير هو معروف وقضيته معروف، انتم كلكم عارفينه. وبرضه بطريقة بتاع الرجوع إلى البلاد ده هتشوف الأجايس والأطفال والمساكين ده واجهوا صعوبات، واجهوا أشياء كثيرة، فطريقة الرجوع ده كان يتوضح يكون أفضل وأفضل.
Then we have the expectations of that the justice will be served quickly. So when are they going to get arrested? When is the judgment going to come? When are we going to see this happening? And well, now we all realize, of course, that the justice is a slow process. So the expectation that there's going to be quick or expeditious delivery of justice is another expectation.
Madame le témoin, après tout ce qui vous est arrivé, après tout ce qui est arrivé à votre communauté, qu'est-ce que vous ressentez?
Na ya chikodro timbi mbie ki encore zo na ya chikodro niape et na ya chikodro timbi timungumba akuape sans trafic en général. Mbie ke zo me azo amumbitonga na nyama na letiala.
Victim participation is very important because, first of all, the victims need to be heard. They need to tell their story, and they need to know there's someone listening to their story, and that something is going to be done about their story. So the first important thing that you give them audience, that they're being heard, is very important. You know, the worst thing would be, yes, we have victims and no one is even bothered about what's happening. That would be horrible. So in terms of victim participation, I'd like to say, yeah, the ICC has done a good job. We are very happy that victims can be heard, they can talk, and yes, the court is listening. Yeah.
Victims are entitled to truth and justice. The processes at the ICC might help them to deal with the past and to move forward. Participation is voluntary. Some victims might prefer not to participate. From those participating, only some of them will personally address the court, and the others will have their voices heard through their lawyers. Not all victims of the crimes will participate in the proceedings, but the court acknowledges their sufferings and is mindful of their situation and their needs.